Welcome back to the channel. In this video I'll be checking out the Vantrue E1 and the Vantrue E1 Lite dash cameras. Vantrue provided 2 of each model to me to facilitate quicker and easier testing, so thank you Vantrue for that support. I'm allowed to say what I find good or bad, so I'll be checking out the dash cameras, some of the optional accessories, some power consumption data, so let's get into it. This video contains several video chapters. If there's one of particular interest to you, jump to the time index listed on the screen here, or expand the video description section and click on the link down there. Hope you enjoy the video. Let's go through an unboxing of the Vantrue E1 and the Vantrue E1 Lite. On the left side I have the Vantrue E1. It's a 2K quad high definition capable dash camera, but it does have a max resolution of 2592 by 1944 at 30 frames per second. On the right side I have the Vantrue E1 Lite. It is released a few months after the release of the original E1. It's a 1080p, which means 1920 by 1080 at 30 frames per second capable dash camera. Now let's start taking a look at what's inside the boxes for both dash cameras. Opening up the box, we have a cover over the contents of the E1, and then on the E1 Lite we have the user manual. Next, in both boxes we have the dash camera itself on the left there. In the E1 box we have the wireless remote control, which will allow you to toggle the audio recording on and off, and also lock any active video file for later review. The E1 Lite does not include a wireless remote control. Next we have a cleaning cloth with the lens. We have some electrostatic stickers for installing the GPS mount on the windshield, and a warning sticker you can place on your vehicle if you want. On the left I have the full contents of the E1 box, including the dash camera, the GPS mount, the wireless remote, the cigarette lighter adapter, the USB data cable, the installation tool, the other items I mentioned in the box in the previous screens, and a replacement 3M adhesive pad in case you need to move the dash camera or have your windshield replaced. We're taking a look at the top of the dash camera. In the left picture you can see the GPS windshield mount. You can see the electrical connectors that connect with the dash camera once you slide the dash camera into the mount. There is a magnet in that connector to hold the dash camera in place. This is the bottom view of both dash cameras. In the upper left corner we have the hole for the internal microphone. Then we have 3 buttons. In the center there I have a informational chart showing the function of each of those buttons. The leftmost button is a record on off with a short press, and the screen on off with a long press. The center button is the microphone on off with a short press, and then toggling on and off parking mode with a long press, and a short press of the rightmost button will toggle on and off the settings menu, and a long press will toggle on and off the Wi-Fi subsystem. This is the left side of both dash cameras. In the upper right corner is the orange button, which has 2 purposes. The short press will result in an emergency lock of the current recording video file, and it will take a snapshot at that point in time. And a long press will toggle on and off the power for the dash camera. We also have the micro SD card slot below that, and towards the front we have some ventilation holes. Now taking a look at the right side of both dash cameras, you can see that there's a USB Type-C connector, and that's where you connect your data cable when you want to connect to your computer. You can see that there's also a USB Type-C connector in the GPS mount in the left picture. You may supply power when installed in the vehicle to either of those, but the intention is to supply it to the GPS mount so you can easily remove the dash camera by sliding it off the GPS mount. This is what a normal recording mode screen looks like. At the very top we have the resolution selected for the video recording. We have the status icons in the row below that. Towards the bottom we have the date and time. We also have on the E1 side we have the wireless remote control icon and the parking mode icon, and the parking mode icon is in the upper right corner for the E1 Lite. When the dash camera enters parking mode, it will display the appropriate icon in the very center of the screen where the parking mode is currently active. And you'll notice that the resolution section on the upper section of the screen has changed to the resolution for that parking mode. When the Wi-Fi system has been enabled on the dash camera, this is the screen that will be displayed, allowing you to connect from your phone with the Vantrue Cam App to either configure the dash camera or access the video files on the microSD card. Here's a front view of both dash cameras. The lens has an aperture of 1.8 and a field of view of 160 degrees. Vantrue does sell an optional CPL filter for the E1 and E1 Lite. It's a 40mm screw-on CPL filter. Once it's screwed onto the front of the dash camera, you rotate the sepia filter to achieve the best reduction of the reflections from the windshield. You can use a piece of paper by placing it on the dashboard, use a flashlight, shine it on the paper, and then rotate the filter as necessary to achieve the best reduction in the reflections from that piece of paper. Vantrue offers a variety of ways to power the dash camera. You have the cigarette lighter adapter included in the box, but if you're going to be using parking mode, I would suggest getting one of the hard-wiring kits. They do have an OBD2 port version, a 2-wire version, which I did test a couple different versions of that, which support 12 and 24 volt systems. And then they sent me this 3-wire version, which allows you to use the ignition accessory power to trigger instantaneous engagement of parking mode and exiting of parking mode when you restore accessory power by starting the engine. This kit does include 4 different types of fuse tabs, one for each of the popular types on vehicles today, and that's for the constant battery power, the red wire. And you'll notice the yellow wire already has a ATM mini fuse soldered to the end of the wire. So if that fuse ever blows, which it really shouldn't have any demand on this wire, so that may be why they soldered this on to the end of it, you really probably should cut that off and use a fuse tab so you can possibly replace that fuse in the future. This is the first time I've seen ones attached to the wire in this manner. The thing that I like about this particular hardwiring kit is you have the option of configuring a low voltage protection setting and a time setting via a series of dip switches on the edge of it here. And looking at the label, you can see that the voltage levels, you can use the first 2 dip switches to configure, and then the time setting with the last 3. In this section, I'm going to do a feature comparison between the Vantrue E1, the Vantrue E1 Lite, and one I consider a direct competitor of the Vantrue E1, the Viofo A119 Mini. I will be using sample footage from all 3 of these dash cameras in this review. Starting off, we have the number of channels, and that's the number of video cameras in the system, and all 3 of these are single channel cameras. Next, we have the image sensor in each of these. The Vantrue E1 and the Viofo A119 Mini use the Sony Starvis IMX335 5 megapixel image sensor. The Vantrue E1 Lite being a 1080p only camera, it uses the Galaxy Core GC2093 2 megapixel image sensor. The lens for the Vantrue E1 and E1 Lite has an aperture value of 1.8 with a field of view of 160 degrees. The lens is fixed to the body of the camera and you adjust it by moving the hinge in the GPS windshield mount. For the Viofo A119 Mini, the aperture value is 1.6 with a field of view of slightly under 140 degrees, and the adjustment is up and down using a ratcheting mechanism in the lens attached to the body of the dash camera. All 3 dash cameras do not supply a micro SD card, so you must purchase one, and the maximum storage capacity supported by the Vantrue E1 and the E1 Lite is 512 gigabytes, and the official storage capacity of the Viofo A119 Mini is 256 gigabytes. But Viofo Marketing has stated that a 512 gigabyte micro SD card will work with the Viofo A119 Mini. The Vantrue E1 and E1 Lite both have a 1.54 inch LCD screen, and the Viofo A119 Mini has a 1.5 inch LCD screen. All 3 dash cameras have a USB Type-C port on the dash camera itself and also on the windshield GPS mount. Let's move on to the video resolutions and the high dynamic range support. They're interrelated here. The Vantrue E1 and the Viofo A119 Mini do have video resolutions with 60 frames per second as an option. That's only when HDR is not enabled. The video resolution selection is how you enable or disable HDR for the Vantrue E1 dash cameras, and for the Viofo A119 Mini, that's through a separate setting. All 3 dash cameras support Wi-Fi connectivity to the dash camera from your phone. The Vantrue E1 and E1 Lite only support 2.4 GHz connections, while the Viofo A119 Mini supports 2.4 and 5 GHz connections. All 3 dash cameras include a GPS logger module, which is part of the windshield mount. All 3 dash cameras use a supercapacitor internally to power the dash camera, which allows it to gracefully power down the dash camera when external power has been removed. A supercapacitor is far more resilient in extreme heat conditions compared to a battery. All 3 dash cameras have a way of powering the dash camera through a cigarette lighter adapter. In the Viofo A119 Mini, that's actually a USB adapter with a USB cable that connects to the dash camera. And then they all offer some version of a hardwiring kit to power it for parking mode support. Next, we have the list of parking mode or parking guard, depending on your terminology, recording options for the dash cameras. The Vantrue cameras have 4 different modes, and the VFO A119 Mini has 3 different options. The Vantrue E1 and E1 Lite have a collision detection mode, which is a low power consumption mode. There's no corresponding mode in the A119 Mini that has this low power consumption mode. But in this case, the camera goes into a deep sleep, and it takes a long period of time for it to awaken once an impact has been detected. You can see with the E1 in my testing, it was 9.5 seconds to wake up the camera, and then 9 seconds for the E1 Lite. So that's a very long time after the impact, so you may miss a lot of the activity around the vehicle. I don't know that I would personally use that particular mode, except if you need a very extended period of time for parking mode. Check out my power consumption data in the other section of this video where that may be a benefit to you. Next, in the Vantrue cameras, we have motion detection, which is buffered for the E1, and it will contain about 3 to 5 seconds before the motion took place in the video. And then for motion detection in the E1 Lite, it's not buffered, so there's 0 seconds before the motion. The next option is low bitrate with audio, and that's at 1080p 15 frames per second or 720p at 15 frames per second. And then the low frame rate is without audio, and you can pick 1, 5, 10, or 15 frames per second. Then for the VFO A119 Mini, there's auto event detection, which is a buffered motion-based recording. It'll include 15 seconds before and 30 seconds after the triggering event. The time-lapse mode has no audio. You have 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 frames per second as an option. And then my preferred, again, option is low bitrate with audio. VFO recommends using the HK4 hardware kit when you're using the parking mode feature of the dash camera. Moving on to page 2 of the dash camera feature comparison, we start off with voice commands. That's where you can issue a voice command to the dash camera and have it perform a particular function. And that is possible with the Vantrue E1 and E1 Lite. And here's a list of the commands that you can state in English. The Vantrue name for this feature is called Voice Assistant. The currently supported languages are Chinese, English, Japanese, and Russian. The VFO A119 Mini does not support voice commands at this time. Let's move on to voice notifications. That's when the dash camera will issue a spoken message rather than a beep or alert tone when a condition occurs that's noteworthy. The only camera that supports this feature in this comparison chart is the VFO A119 Mini. Moving on, we have the operating temperature range for all 3 of the dash cameras. Moving on to cloud service and internet connectivity. None of the cameras in this particular chart have the ability to connect to a cloud service, nor do the companies offer such a service, and there is no internet connectivity from these 3 dash cameras. The Wi-Fi connectivity to the dash camera is for inbound connections from your phone device to run the app corresponding to that dash camera. Next, we have the list of accessories available for the dash cameras in the list. For the E1, the wireless remote or Bluetooth remote is included with the product at no extra charge. The CPL filter and hardwiring kits are optional and at an extra charge, and the same is true for the E1 Lite. The E1 Lite does not support the wireless remote feature at all. For the VFO A119 Mini, it does have a Bluetooth remote that is optional, and it only supports the locking of the video file. Unlike the one included with the E1, it does not have the ability to toggle the audio recording on and off. You have a clip-on CPL filter as well as an optional feature, and then there's the HK4 3-wire hardwiring kit. You could also use the HK3-C as well. And finally, the last item on my comparison chart is the pricing. It's in US dollars. The Vantrue E1 is listed at $149.99. The E1 Lite is at $99.99, and the VFO A119 Mini at $139.99. Often there are sales active for those products. Make sure you check out the video's description section for any affiliate links or coupon codes that might save you some money. Now let's take a look at some power consumption data that I gathered for the Vantrue E1, E1 Lite, and VFO A119 Mini. My main purpose for this is to see how much power the dash camera consumes in parking mode. I also like to see how much it consumes in normal recording mode, and that's so I can properly size the fuse I put into a fuse tap, because I do get questions from viewers asking that same question, and virtually every dash camera has consumed less than 1 amp, so a 2 amp or 3 amp fuse would be more than sufficient to power a dash camera, especially a 3-wire hardwiring kit. The accessory power does not actually power the dash camera. It's used as a signal to toggle parking mode. So that one can very definitely use a 1 amp, and the battery constant power is the one with the 2 or 3 amp fuse. Taking a look at the gray section on the left there for the various parking modes. Over to the right, we see the number of watts that it consumes on average in those modes. For the collision detection version of parking mode, it goes into a deep sleep when it goes into parking mode and consumes very little power, on average 0.1 watts. And it takes about 9.5 seconds once an impact has occurred to awaken the camera. And in my opinion, that's way too long to wait for the camera to come back up and start operating and recording video. You may miss important details of what the impact was within that 9.5 second period. Moving on to motion detection parking mode, it will consume power even when no motion is detected. It's a buffered parking mode, so it's waiting for the triggering motion to be detected, and once it is, you'll include 3 to 5 seconds before the triggering motion in the video that records to the microSD card. You can see that using the low bitrate parking mode consumes far less power compared to the low frame rate. So if you're looking for the longest time in parking mode on a dashcam battery pack, I would probably pick the low bitrate option for the Vantrue E1 dash camera. Now moving on to the Vantrue E1 Lite dash camera test results, you can see that the power consumption overall is much less than the Vantrue E1 dash camera. This is a 1080p camera versus the E1 being a 2K quad high definition dash camera. I received the Vantrue E1 Lite dash cameras a few months after the Vantrue E1 dash cameras, and I received a 3-wire version of the hardwiring kit from Vantrue, and I used the 3-wire hardwiring kit to power the E1 Lite in the power consumption tests. The thing to note with the difference in the hardwiring kits is the 3-wire version does consume more power than the 2-wire version, so keep that in mind when you look at the estimated runtimes on dashcam battery packs. I'll note that in the information that I display there. Now looking at the collision detection parking mode, just like with the E1 Lite goes into a deep sleep, but it does consume a little bit more power in this chart, again because of the different hardwiring kit being used here. The E1 Lite also takes about 9 seconds to wake up after an impact, just like the E1, which took 9.5 seconds. Moving on to motion detection parking mode, you can see when there's no motion and when there's motion in both modes, it does consume power, just like the E1. But the difference here is the E1 Lite is not buffered as far as this particular mode. The recorded video will only contain the triggering motion and what occurs after that. Now let's take a look at the low bitrate and low frame rate parking modes. And with the E1 Lite, the power consumption on average is virtually identical between those two modes. Unlike the E1, where low frame rate actually consumed more power than low bitrate. So if your main criteria for which parking mode to use is based on how much power it consumes, for the E1 Lite, low bitrate and low frame rate are equal options in that respect. For completeness, I'm including the test results for my power consumption test for the Viofo A119 Mini. I did this several months ago when I reviewed that dash camera. And I'll use the parking mode average consumption in the projected runtimes on dashcam battery packs in the next screen. Based on the power consumption data that I gathered, these are the projected runtimes in parking modes that are supported for each of these dash cameras. And there are 2 different battery pack capacities listed here. The older units from Blackview and Cellink Neo that had 76.8 watt hours are the first column there as far as estimated times. And then the right column for each of these is for the newer 96 watt hour dashcam battery packs. In fact, I just did a review of those 3 dashcam battery packs on my channel. The upper left corner has the Vantrue E1 data. The upper right has the Vantrue E1 Lite dash camera data. And in the lower center, I have the Viofo A119 Mini dashcam data. Please note the estimated runtimes are in days, then hours, and then minutes. I've also noted on the screen the amount of power that the hardwiring kit itself consumes, so you can subtract that out from the total average watts consumed to get an idea of what the dash camera itself is consuming. It comes into play here if you look at the Vantrue E1 in the upper left in the collision detection waiting for impact mode. It consumes 0.1 watts, and of that 0.04 watts is the hardwire kit itself. In the upper right, in that same mode for the E1 Lite, we have 0.21 watts being consumed, but of that 0.15 watts is the hardwiring kit. The estimated runtime for the Vantrue E1 in collision detection mode with the 2-wire hardwiring kit would be 40 days. And the estimated runtime for the Vantrue E1 Lite using the 3-wire hardwiring kit in collision detection mode waiting for impact would be 19 days, 1 hour, and 8 minutes. The E1 Lite, when it's powered with a 2-wire hardwiring kit in collision detection mode waiting for impact, would also last 40 days, since the amount of power used by the E1 Lite and the E1 dash cameras are identical when you subtract out the amount of power used by the hardwiring kit. I hope you can use the parking mode runtime estimates on the screen to make an informed choice on whether a particular dash camera is more appropriate for your situation. In this section, I'm comparing the video with the HDR feature turned off, and all three cameras have a CPL filter installed. One thing I notice here is that the E1 Lite with the Galaxy Core image sensor, everything kind of has a brown hue to it, and you can see it in the pavement compared to the other two dash cameras in this comparison. Now in this comparison, I have 3 additional cameras in the vehicle, and I have the HDR feature turned on with CPL filters installed. The Galaxy Core image sensor in the E1 Lite still has a slightly brown hue to it, but you'll also notice that the Viofo A119 Mini has a kind of a grayish cloud to it, and that's true of any of the daytime footage with the HDR feature turned on. Viofo recommends turning off the HDR feature in the A119 Mini during daylight hours. In fact, that's one of the reasons they have the HDR timer feature in their firmware settings. In this section, I'm showing you examples of the Vantrue E1 with the HDR feature turned off on the top section, and the Vantrue E1 with the HDR feature turned on. Both have CPL filters installed. In this section, I'm showing you examples from the Vantrue E1 Lite dash cameras. The upper video has the HDR feature turned off, the lower video has the HDR feature turned on, and both have CPL filters installed. In this section, I have a 50-50 split screen here, showing you the Vantrue E1 video on the top with HDR feature turned on, and the Viofo A119 Mini with HDR feature turned on, and again, both have CPL filters installed. In this section, I continue the 50-50 split screen, but this time I have the video from the Vantrue E1 with the HDR feature turned off, and I'm comparing it with the Viofo A119 Mini with the HDR feature turned off, and again, both dash cameras have CPL filters installed. This section kicks off the nighttime comparison of the 3 different dash cameras with the HDR feature turned off, and I have the CPL filters removed. That's what the WO/CPL means, without CPL filter. This is nighttime footage from the 3 additional dash cameras I have in the car. All have the HDR feature turned on, and again, the CPL filters have been removed, so they're without CPL filters. The thing that strikes me here is with the HDR feature turned on, the E1 and E1 Lite dash cameras have a lot of noise in the image. The Viofo A119 Mini image with the HDR feature at night looks pretty good. In this section, I'm comparing the Vantrue E1 footage with the HDR feature turned off, and that's on the top section, with the HDR feature turned on in the bottom section. You can see that the amount of noise has been greatly increased when the HDR feature has been enabled for the Vantrue E1. Now we're taking a look at a 50-50 split screen of the Vantrue E1 Lite dash cameras. The HDR feature is turned off on the top video, and the HDR feature is turned on the bottom video. The amount of noise introduced by the HDR feature in this particular example is not as great as in the E1 version of it. It's using a different image sensor, the Galaxy Core image sensor in this case, versus the Sony Starvis IMX335 in the E1. In this section, I'm comparing the two quad high definition dash cameras, the E1 versus the A119 Mini. Both have the HDR feature turned on. You can see a lot more noise in the E1 footage compared to the A119 Mini. I'd have to say that the A119 Mini HDR feature at night performs much better than the E1's version of the HDR feature. In this section, I'm comparing the footage with the HDR features turned off in the Vantrue E1 on the top section and the A119 Mini in the bottom section. With the HDR feature turned off in the E1 dash camera, the footage has far less noise than it did with the HDR feature turned on. In this section, I'm going to show you a plate capture test at night, and this is a best case scenario with the vehicle directly in front of my vehicle. In this particular situation, my headlights are not shining directly on the plate, and virtually all of the cameras here can capture the plate reasonably well. And I have intentionally blurred the third and fourth characters of each plate capture. And this is a continuation of the plate capture test just a few seconds later, after the vehicle movement has aimed my headlights directly at the license plate. And you can see all the cameras on the top, which are the cameras with the HDR feature turned off. None of them can make out the plate on the rear of the vehicle. The cameras on the lower section are the cameras with the HDR feature turned on. And the Viofo A119 Mini did the best at capturing the plate contents. The second best plate capture was by the Vantrue E1 Lite. And then the third is the Vantrue E1. One of the things I pointed out in the questions and answers section was the fact that the use of a CPL filter with the E1 or E1 Lite dash cameras at night could result in the presence of a ring of light around the edge of the video, and this is an example of one of those videos where I captured that situation. I have a vehicle directly in front of me with the brake lights on, and you can see a red ring at the outer edge of the video. There's no setting to get around this within the firmware settings of the dash camera. The only way to work around it is to remove the CPL filter at night. This is a quick walkthrough of the Vantrue Cam app, and I'm using it with a Vantrue E1 dash camera. Initially, when you start up the app, it will prompt you with the steps necessary to connect to the Wi-Fi. Of course, you need to turn on the Wi-Fi feature within the dash camera, and then select it from the available Wi-Fi SSIDs that are available in your area. And then the Android version that I'm using prompts me with the actual one for that dash camera. And here we come up with a live view screen, and you have the options of turning on and off the microphone, turning on and off recording like I just did with the record button. On the left side there is a button to press to take a photo of the current field of view. And then on the lower center, we have the icon to invoke the SD card viewer. And it's now retrieving the list of thumbnails for the various videos on the micro SD card. And I'm scrolling down and I'll click on one of those and it'll begin playback of the video, but I'll ask it to download the video file. And you can have it navigate through the video files, you can delete it or download it, and the download arrow I just clicked on. The download of the video file I've sped up in this playback of the screen recording, and I've added this elapsed timer. It'll take 1 minute and 3 seconds to download that 127.1 megabyte video file. Again, the connection to the Vantrue E1 and E1 Lite is a 2.4 gigahertz connection. It could benefit from adding support for a 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi connection to speed those downloads up. And we're navigating back up to the top level, back to the live view, and in the upper right corner is the gear icon, which will go into the settings for the dash camera. And you can see the individual settings here at their current values for most of them. And then you tap on the particular setting to bring up the individual settings within that. I currently have low bitrate parking mode selected, but I'm going through the 4 different options available here. Within each of the parking mode selections, there are sub-selections, and the currently active selection has the green indicator on the right-hand side. Then I navigate back out of the parking mode selections, and I want to go check the current version of the firmware. So I scroll down in the settings and then look in system info. It'll show you the model of the dash camera, the current software, which is the firmware version, and then the place where you can obtain further information, which is vantrue.net. Here are some questions or concerns that have come up during my testing of the Vantrue E1 and E1 Lite dash cameras. And the first question is, what type of power adapters are available for the E1 and E1 Lite dash cameras? On the right side, a list of various ways of powering the dash cameras. You have the option of using the cigarette lighter adapter that is included in the box with the dash camera. Otherwise, it's an optional purchase for the 2-wire, 3-wire, or OBD hardwire charging cable kits. The one thing I didn't mention in this list is for the Vantrue 3-lead ACC hardwire kit. It also has that timer function, so make sure you look at the unboxing section where I mentioned that in the list of features for that particular kit. The next thing you might be wondering about the E1 and E1 Lite dash camera is there a way to turn on and off the high dynamic range feature? And currently that's only possible by selecting a video resolution that has it either in the text description of the resolution or doesn't have it. In the future, that may change with an updated firmware. The next question you may have is, what does the E1 wireless remote do? It's part of a feature called wireless hotkeys. The top button on the wireless remote is used to toggle on and off the audio recording feature of the E1 dash camera, and the bottom button is used to lock the current video file. In case an event is taking place and you want to lock it and you can't reach the dash camera, you can use this to quickly and easily lock the video file, and it will take a video snapshot at the same time. The wireless remote is not provided with the E1 Lite dash camera. This is only an E1 dash camera feature. The next question that may come up is, why won't my Vantrue E1 enter parking mode? And I'm talking about the motion-based vehicle parking mode detection. And when I first received the Vantrue E1, the firmware available in the dash camera and several releases after that still didn't allow it to go into parking mode. It wasn't properly detecting that the vehicle had been stationary for 5 minutes. Over a period of several weeks, I worked with Vantrue to isolate the issue, and the engineers at Vantrue were able to identify the problem, and I did get a firmware release that fixed it. So if you're having this problem, first make sure that you've actually enabled parking mode in the firmware settings. And if you have and it's still not going into parking mode and you have one of the earlier firmware releases, update the firmware to a current release, and that should resolve the issue. With the first issue resolved, it would actually go into parking mode. I ran into this next issue, which is, why does the vertical field of view change in parking mode videos? When I would actually get it to go into parking mode now with the updated firmware, it would then shift the field of view upward in the 1920 by 1080 version of the parking mode video, and there was no way to correct that in the firmware settings. Further testing and feedback to Vantrue resulted in a new firmware release that resolved that issue. So if you're experiencing that issue, make sure you update the firmware to a current release for the Vantrue E1 dash camera. One of the questions you may have, and an issue I found while testing, was why are there light rings appearing in the nighttime recorded video? It turned out that the CPL filter being installed at night caused a ring of light to appear on the outer edges of the video, and depends on what the light source was directly in front of the vehicle, and it would show up in that color. So in the left side there I have an example of the brake lights from the vehicle in front of me showing up as a red ring on the outside, and then in the right image I have the headlights from the oncoming vehicle. Those are showing up as a white ring on the outer edge of the video. The only way to resolve this issue is to remove the CPL filter at night. There is no other product change or installation approach that will resolve the issue other than removing the CPL filter during nighttime driving. And the last question I have on the list is, why does my E1 dash camera randomly lose power? When I received the first E1 dash camera, I would plug in the power to the GPS windshield mount, and randomly while I was driving it would turn off the power and turn it back on. After a few occurrences of this, I reported to Vantrue. Vantrue updated the electronics of the GPS module to prevent this issue from occurring. They sent me a replacement module and it's been working fine ever since. As a temporary measure, you can move the USB-C cable that provides power from the GPS module to the side of the camera, and then contact Vantrue support to report the issue, and then have them send you an updated GPS windshield mount. That should hopefully resolve your problem. Here are my final thoughts on the Vantrue E1 and Vantrue E1 Lite dash cameras. Both the E1 and E1 Lite are fairly inexpensive dash cameras. I like the fact that both dash cameras have the ability to be controlled with voice commands using the voice assistant feature. After releasing the Vantrue E1 dash camera, Vantrue decided to target a different buyer with the E1 Lite. The E1 Lite only has 1080p video recording capabilities. It doesn't come with a wireless remote. So if you're looking for higher resolution, of course the E1 might be the better choice, but if you're looking for a bare bones dash camera that has HDR support, the E1 Lite may be something that you want to consider. If you would prefer 2K quad high definition video from your dash camera, then you'd have to look at the Vantrue E1. I did compare it with the Viofo A119 Mini, and I think that the HDR features in both of those cameras have some improvements that could be made. The E1 during the daytime is great, but at night the noise level gets quite high, and that's true for both the E1 and E1 Lite. As a comparison, I showed you Viofo A119 Mini HDR footage. The daytime video, as you saw, was not that great, and Viofo right now says that you shouldn't really be using HDR feature during the daytime. That's why they have the HDR timer feature in their firmware settings. So if your primary purchase decision is based on the HDR implementation in the dash camera, I would have to say the E1 and E1 Lite for nighttime recording do not provide the best quality video at this point. You may want to look at competitors such as the Viofo A119 Mini. I hope Vantrue continues to improve that quality going forward and makes it a viable competitor soon. I hope you found the information in this video to be helpful in making a purchase decision. If you have decided to purchase one of the Vantrue E1 or E1 Lite dash cameras, check out the video's description section for potential affiliate links where you can purchase that, and my company will make a commission, but at no extra cost to you. And there may be coupon codes in the description section as well to save you some money off your purchase. So thanks for coming to the channel and checking out the video. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.